can't believe that we're all on this sinking ship, but I don't know who's going to tell the emperor he has no clothes.
America may muddle through, but you're heading for a true crisis. I don't see a future in which America is the dominant world power.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Sanity podcast, another international version. I'm Dave Briggs here in Cabo, Alison Camerata in Connecticut, as we try to once again give you a dose of sanity in what truly has become a sandwich, Alison. I mean, I think James Carville may have been spot on with the complete collapse of the Trump administration in the first 100 days. It is actually difficult at this point to spotlight anything that's gone well other than the tightening of our southern border. Everything else on almost all fronts seems to be collapsing, and independents have gone, but MAGA is still largely in lockstep with President Trump here.
Well, that's why I question your term of collapse. I wouldn't say it's collapsing right now. I mean, they're still just doing what they do, which is sowing chaos, etc. I've created a graphics package I'm going to give you a choice of what you'd like to talk about today.
Yeah,
So
okay,
here are
great.
just some of the top stories. Would you like to discuss Abrego Garcia and how he's unlawfully been deported to an El Salvadoran prison, and the Supreme Court says that they need to facilitate it immediately, but the Trump administration is not doing that? Or would you like to talk about the economy, which I know is one of your strong suits? Or would you like to talk about the Pete Hegseth strikes again, where he now has shared classified information and war details with his wife and brother, who are not in the administration? Which one? Your choice. Dealer's choice.
Well, as much as I think Pete Hegseth is a clown and not a serious individual, as much as I'm concerned about the lack of due process on the immigration front, I tend to agree a little bit with Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, who's called this a bit of a distraction for the Democratic Party. Now, he took a lot of heat on that front. Again, I am concerned about the lack of due process. I think there's a little bit too much focus for Democrats on one man that we don't know enough about.
Let me just say this, because I know you're not going to choose that. So let me just say, don't you think that due process is kind of like not a distraction? It's kind of a foundational principle of our Constitution. How is that a distraction? If you can do it to him, you can do it to anybody. If you can deport him without due process, you can do it to anybody.
Don't get me wrong. I'm concerned. I find this terrifying. I am an economic voter. I always have been. I always will be. And that's what concerns me most, because this country was hitting on all cylinders economically, just about on every aspect. We were on fire. Our economy was the envy of the world. And Donald Trump has literally become a wrecking ball for the strongest economy on the planet. And this is what the only reason I call it a distraction is I believe Democrats always failed to focus on this. They always failed to talk about the strength of the economy, and they're failing to talk about what President Trump is doing to it now and how they will fix it. We're talking about $10 trillion of market cap wiped away this year for nothing else other than a stupid trade war that only one or two men on the planet actually thinks is a good idea. And now President Trump wants to blame this on the Fed, on Jerome Powell, and it has actually made the markets break more because they're terrified about not having an independent Federal Reserve, because he called him a loser. He has threatened to fire Jerome Powell, and immediately upon posting that on Truth Social, the markets plummeted yet again, down 3% on the S&P, the Dow, and the NASDAQ. And right now we're down between 10 and 14% on the U.S. stock market this year, an unfathomable number for economy that was the envy of the world. He is a six-time bankruptcy master, and he is doing it yet again. And I just can't understand. Here is the moment where I say, how is MAGA with him on this? He is destroying it, and he wants someone to blame. He has now made J.D. Vance the czar, the tariff czar, which is a terrible assignment for J.D. Vance. He knows he can't possibly fix these policies, And now he wants to blame Jerome Powell for not cutting interest rates. Well, Powell knows he cannot, because his job is not to sit there and fix a disaster of the president's own making. He cannot do that. If he does bend to the president, the markets will plummet into further chaos. I just don't see how we turn this back. The dollar's at a 3-year low. I mentioned the markets. GDP growth is shrinking. And at the core of all of it, inflation is probably going to get worse. This man is a wrecking ball unlike I've ever seen anything in my entire life.
I mean, JD Vance just killed the Pope. Hasn't he done enough? I'm kidding. Everybody, spare me your emails. But I agree with you. Saddling somebody with tariff czar is about as bad a title as it gets. But Dave, it's the politics of retribution, which we all know. The president is so built that way. He's wired for retribution. I don't know what happened in his childhood, that he sees everything through the lens of who's screwing him over, how he's being taken as a chump, how America's being taken advantage of. But that is the lens through which he sees everything. And somehow we are all going down with this Freudian, childhood wound of his. I don't know if his father didn't give him enough credit or what happened, but I do see it in those terms. And I know that you see it in more kind of economic data terms, but I see it psychologically, and I can't believe that we're all on this sinking ship. I guess think that maybe something could still turn it around. Maybe some light could sneak into this darkness. Some common sense could prevail, but I don't know who's going to tell the emperor he has no clothes.
I just don't know what can turn it around, because he's in so deep on this trade war on all fronts that we know he's not going to be able to back down. He wants a boogeyman. He wants a bad guy. And that's why he's trying to make it Powell, or eventually he may make it JD Vance so he can then bring in his son as the heir apparent for the party. But at this point, China is not even flinching at this trade war. And the reason is simple. We always said this. When you're not worried about elections, when you're not worried about human rights, and I'm not defending President Xi, I'm just saying the man's an emperor. He doesn't have to worry about polls or elections. He doesn't give a damn about individual rights or freedoms. He can wait this out. We cannot. And I don't see how they will back down. And I don't know that anyone is racing to the table to make a deal, as the administration has at least pretended will happen. But
okay, hold on.
It's just, okay.
If you'll indulge me, because I gave you the economy, but I'd like to move on to the other giant show, Pete Hegseth Strikes Again. Now, I am so incensed by this. Now, it's always a little bit dicey, Dave, and I don't know if you feel this way talking about people that we worked with at Fox and about Pete Hegseth. Pete Hegseth personally has never been anything but completely friendly to me. And so it's always a little uncomfortable having to, shine a light on his incredible bad judgment and hypocrisy and everything. But this isn't personal. Now we're all in this. Like, I'm not trying to make it personal. He made it personal by accepting this nomination of Secretary of Defense when he wasn't qualified. Okay. He has horrible judgment, as we saw beforehand, before he was nominated. I mean, when he was nominated, it was on display, horrible judgment. And that has continued apace. But mostly what I'm stunned by, well, not stunned, disgusted, I guess, by, is the rank hypocrisy. This is the person who talked ad nauseum about Hillary Clinton's emails, about what horrible judgment it was. I mean, he said things like she should be prosecuted for the emails. Anybody who did that would be fired on the spot. He said any military professional who ever did that, he claimed in 2016, would be fired on the spot. Lock her up. And now he's doing something, arguably, he has done something much worse. He has not only shared war plans with an unsecure Signal chat, but also with his wife, who you and I know well. She was our producer at Fox and Friends. Again, this isn't personal. This is now about national security, and he can't stay in this. He can't stay in this office.
And unfortunately, I would be willing to place the money on the fact that he will stay in this job. I don't see any regret from him. I don't see any remorse from President Trump in this latest scandal. is completely inexcusable. And yes, to your point, should be not just fired, but prosecuted when talking about Hillary Clinton on a number of occasions on Fox News. I, too, have heard nothing but good things personally about Pete Hegseth. I don't know him all that well, but I know people that say he was a wonderful person to them. He is out of his depth. He is a joke. He's not a serious person. He's not a serious person. And he's running the freaking Pentagon with almost $1 trillion at stake, our nation's defense at stake. And he's not a serious person. He's the biggest joke in the history of the Defense Department, and he needs to step down, and he will not. He is calling this a hoax. He is lashing out at reporters as the Trump playbook is in all its glory right now. And his wife, Jen, again, a former producer of ours, she knows better. She has to know better. She spent her entire life producing news, and she's seeing war plans. Yes, they are attack plans that she was included on in a chain that Pete started himself this time. And now his spokesperson, who was fired, John Ulyat, he actually resigned.
Was he fired? I think he resigned.
He resigned. He was going to be fired because he was clearly not okay with what's going on. He called this a baffling purge that's led to a near collapse inside the Pentagon's ranks. He said the building is in disarray under Hegseth. He said it's total chaos and the month from hell in a full-blown meltdown, talking about the Department of Defense and how the rank and file is feeling under the leadership of Pete Hegseth. And you and I always talked about the focus was on the wrong things through his confirmation. It shouldn't have been about his drinking. It should have been about his judgment. Judgment is all that matters in a position like this, and he is an utter fraud.
Well, I think they are part and parcel. I think they're one and the same. I think the fact that he would drink to excess, as so many witnesses talked about, and we know people who saw him do that he would drink to excess at professional gatherings, and that he would cheat on his wives and impregnate other people while he was married. All of that, I know you put that into the personal bucket. I put it into the judgment bucket. It's all judgment, okay? And mostly, I know that you and I talked about how we were mostly alarmed by how he had run 2 veterans organizations into the ground financially. So none of that is a good precursor for running the Pentagon. And as we've seen, we haven't had to wait very long to watch the damage that he's doing there. But Dave, I also think that there was another headline about his spokesperson who resigned from the Pentagon. What that spokesperson, John Ulyat, said is there will be more bombshells coming in the next month about Pete Hegseth. Do we have to endure that? Well, I mean, that he said prepare for more bombshells. Like, can we just be done with this now?
I don't know what else could change the minds of the administration. I don't know what could make this any worse. And again, the question becomes, who's the one in the administration that says enough is enough? Who's going to step forward and say we have to demand accountability from ourselves? I've given up on John Thune. I've given up on Marco Rubio. Is it Ted Cruz? I don't know. I just don't see anyone stepping forward and having any accountability whatsoever.
All right. Well, now I forgot to add one more graphic here because we're also going to be talking about what's happening at Harvard and with colleges and if they are going to acquiesce to the administration's demands. So I know that is another thing that is top of mind to everybody. So would you like to introduce our guest?
Top-notch graphics, first off. Kudos to the graphics department who's worked really hard. We ought to give the graphics department a bonus. Yeah, these attacks on Harvard and elite institutions, they're tough to defend on the surface because I'm not in the camp of defending someone with a $53 billion endowment. The elite universities, that's not necessarily where I gravitate. State school kid. But I am deeply concerned about cuts to research and medical research and the Boston hospital system, which does relate to Harvard. I am very concerned about the implications 5 and 10 years down the road on American exceptionalism. But at the heart of this, we're getting to the point that Evan Mandery wrote a really good piece for Politico magazine, which entitled "Trump's Attack on Harvard is Ridiculous, but it still needs to change." Evan joins us now from Montclair, New Jersey. Evan, great to have you on the show. This attack on Harvard and elite institutions has been going on for several weeks without enough discussion on what exactly the Trump administration wants from Harvard. They laid it out in the letter. That letter has been published. What do they want? What are they demanding of Harvard?
Well, thanks for having me. I could use a dose of sanity, so I'm glad to be here. I'm not sure I can put you precisely in their minds. The letter is worth a read because it's completely incoherent and clearly not written by somebody who's ever worked in a university. I mean, they talk a lot about combating anti-Semitism, but there's obviously a complete disconnect between that letter and the remedial measures they've taken, which is principally cutting funding for healthcare research and, any anti-Semitism problem on campus.
Yeah, Evan, I mean, one of the things that was in the letter, and I do, like you, recommend that people read it, they're demanding viewpoint diversity in admissions. That actually sounds good. I mean, am I wrong? As a parent of kids who are now in college, viewpoint diversity is what we were looking for. I mean, in other words, I don't know that it's the Trump administration's position, right to demand that, but I understand the impulse to want that. Or are they disguising something else and calling it viewpoint diversity?
Well, for starters, right, the government getting into the business of making viewpoint specific decisions is a violation of the First Amendment, right? So I think we need to distinguish between whether we might think that's a worthy institutional goal, which I think it is, although I think it's very hard to quantify and to measure, and whether that's a permissible basis for government action, which I think it's not.
Another noble goal, at least on the surface, Evan, is merit-based hiring and merit-based admissions. Is that what the Trump administration actually wants? And why does Harvard disagree?
Right. I mean, I don't think that's actually what they're serious about. The plausible connection would be, okay, we're going to cut off some support that we give the undergraduate program, if that's what they were actually interested in, as opposed to, we're going to cut $1 billion in infectious disease research, which doesn't really seem to serve any interest. I mean, I'm in this sort of business, if you could call this a utterly non-lucrative, I make nothing business of trying to get elite colleges to be better social actors. So when I talk about this, and I talk about it a lot, I actually reject the construct of merit. Most of the mechanisms that are at place in these colleges favor affluent white people, like SAT scores and legacy preference. So I don't really think merit is really in the discussion on either side. But I take the point.
One of the things in your article that really was eye-opening and kind of disgusting, and it's just what you were talking about, Harvard has more students coming from the top 1% of income than the bottom 60%. Screw them. I mean, screw them. That made me so angry. They could have changed that. Like, I went to a public high school in New Jersey. There were some rich kids there and there were some poor kids there. And I can assure you the rich kids were not smarter than the poor kids. So Harvard is doing something intentional that more of their kids come from the top 1%.
Well, let me say a couple of things. I really obviously quite agree with that. And I resisted when I wrote that piece for Politico, posting a kind of I told you so moment. And I had a piece in Politico, which was post the Supreme Court's decision ending affirmative action, where I said elite colleges are about to become the villains. And so Harvard and Stanford and Yale get a massive tax advantage, right? It's worth about $20 billion a year collectively. So it isn't crazy to talk about what public interest is being served by that tax advantage. Now, what I would think, it would either be letting in a diverse set of students, either socioeconomically or racially diverse, or promoting them into do-gooder careers. And they do neither. Almost all of their admission systems privilege rich white kids, and 62% of Harvard students last year either went into management consulting, investment banking, or the tech sector. So they're taking rich white kids and they're turning them into management consultants and investment bankers. But that said, I don't think this is a serious critique of those admissions systems, because you would just be engaging with the colleges in a totally different way. What it is just a way of sending up elites, because sadly, because that's a tactic that authoritarians resort to.
And this is why your piece in Politico got my attention. And the title, for those who have not yet read it, Trump's attacks on Harvard is ridiculous, but it still needs to change. Is this primarily the only thing, or is there more that Harvard needs to change? And have they set themselves up for this moment?
Well, I definitely think they've set themselves up for this moment. So I'm in the camp that I don't think the affirmative action decision ever should have reached the Supreme Court. And that's because Harvard steadfastly doubled down on maintaining its existing admission system, because Harvard and the University of North Carolina and all schools like it had a race-neutral way that they could have increased diversity, which was they could have reduced preference for athletes, legacies, donors, and the children of faculty and staff. Those are ALDC preferences. And it's a massive bucket, right? Sports are a massive pathway of access for rich white students. And people tend to dismiss it, but at schools like elite liberal arts colleges like Williams and Amherst, about a third of students on campus are recruited athletes. And, people only watch Division I college football, so they're like, oh, that's a pathway of access for young black students. But Division III college football is overwhelmingly white. And then you're talking about squash and downhill skiing. And, I teach at the City University of New York, and I'll say to my students, how many of you have ever even heard of squash or heard of lacrosse? And, most never have. But, people are spending $40,000 or $50,000 a year to prepare their kids to get recruited for these pathways that, I don't know, I just can't imagine have anything to do with operating a good college in any sense of the word, right? Sports should be for fun.
I mean, Evan, when you were saying that you don't believe that the administration obviously is sort of doing this in good conscience and wanting more access for, less socioeconomically privileged kids, what could they have done? Was there a way for the Trump administration to engage with Ivy League schools in a real way that would have gotten the Ivy Leagues to change their policies?
100%. I mean, look, my frame of this has always been the tax break, which is huge leverage, is either going to be leveraged by the left for access or by the right for punishment of anti-Trump elitism. I mean, imagine that letter was written, narrowly tailored in a way that said to Harvard, we're reconsidering your tax advantage. We want to see you move to, if they want to frame it in terms of merit, say, we want to see you eliminate pathways that are anti-meritocratic. That we can agree upon. I'm not so confident that there's a system of merit out there, but I know that there are anti-meritocratic systems, like how much money mommy or daddy makes being a way that gets you in, and those should be cut out. So, but the letter is like this absurd laundry list of, I mean, one of the things is, decrease the power of junior faculty members, which, trust me, they're virtually powerless, and increase the power of administrators, who are super, super powerful. So the letter is just so exhaustive that it doesn't really have any meaning. But if they had said, we want you to increase the percentage of Pell Grant students that you admit to your college, or we're going to cut off Pell Grant funding, well, that seems like a logically, connected problem and solution.
Hmm.
I am most concerned, Evan, about the long-term consequences of these cuts. And we're talking about billions and billions of dollars, and now an additional billion in research threats, at least from the administration. And Governor Maura Healey from Massachusetts was on CBS on Sunday talking about the many unintended consequences, doctors and scientists being cut, hospitals that are part of a teaching system being gutted. And at the core of this, American exceptionalism, which is some of where the breakthrough research and discovery comes from, this very elite university system. What concerns you most about the consequences of these enormous cuts?
I think you're right to place your concern where you're placing it, right? So the challenge here is, how do you leverage government incentives like the tax break in a way that preserves what's great about America's university system? And the research function of universities is truly great, while shaking up these pathways of access to the colleges, which are a small part of their core businesses, which are definitely not great and definitely favoring rich white kids. But as you're, what you're getting at, is they're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because, I mean, I think we're all grateful that messenger RNA vaccines exist, and tons of that research happens at places like Harvard. By the way, I used to play basketball a little bit with Governor Hurley in college. She's a great basketball player. Great.
Did not know that. She's a terrific governor as well. But if you can, if you could add a little color to how we'll see this play out years down the road.
How's your guys' crystal ball? Mine is pretty foggy. I mean, I'm on the very pessimistic side of where we are in America. In my thinking, it's kind of already over. I mean, I think American hegemony is over. I can't imagine any American ally ever fully trusting America again, even if they believed whoever succeeds Trump would be committed to sort of traditional core American values. How would you know that it couldn't shift back? And, I run a small nonprofit called Class Action, and we try to get these colleges to be better social actors. We organize students to fight against legacy preference and to try to get them to, God forbid, produce some teachers instead of investment bankers. But today, I and my nonprofits stand with Harvard, because the assault on the independence of the American academy and research is really, really threatening to America's long-term interests.
Professor, I think you're a little too pessimistic. I mean, the United States, Germany, for instance, has come back. People trust Germany as an ally now, despite what, happened during World War II and with Hitler. So I think that I don't think that the United States is like besmirched permanently, but I take your point that it can be there can be long-term consequences of all this. And all of that said, Harvard is doing something. Harvard's not capitulating, right? I mean, Harvard got this letter. Harvard then responded with a letter. So explain to everybody how they're doing it differently than, say, a Columbia University.
Well, Harvard did negotiate with the Trump administration. And then, as the Times reported, they didn't really think they were reliable actors, so they reversed course. Look, everybody's going to see this differently. I mean, I think you have core American institutions that have been fundamentally undermined by the first 3 months of this administration. I think the capitulation of law firms to the Trump administration are deeply, deeply damaging to the rule of law in America. And, America may muddle through, but you're heading for a true crisis, which is if a contempt order is entered against the Trump administration and it chooses to ignore it, or say that it doesn't have the force of law, it's not the end of the rule of law in America, but it's the end of the idea that the executive is above the rule, is bound to the law. I read a lot. I'm sure you read a lot. I don't see a future in which America is the dominant world power.
Wow, that is a staggering statement. I'm glad you brought up the attack on law firms as a Harvard Law graduate. To me, that looks very similar on the surface to the way they've attacked universities under the guise of anti-Semitism and things that sound good. Why have some of the biggest, best, and strongest law firms just totally conceded to the Trump administration to the tune of around $1 billion? We're somewhere around $900 million. And is this, Professor, anything short of extortion?
Yeah, I'm good with Evan, by the way. I like my students to call me that too. But I appreciate it. It is extortionate. Look at the thin justifications for for some of the punishments that have been, the basis for targeting these law firms. So like Bill Mueller worked there. Oh my God. Like, okay, at a 2,000 partner law firm. But I mean, Dave, you asked like $1 million, $10 million, $100 million question. I mean, the reporting is that Paul Weiss makes $20 million per partner. So what would the cost be to Paul Weiss if it had government clearances, rejected? How much of its business would that affect? Okay, I'm going to say way less than 1%, but let's say it's 10%. Could those partners have stood to make $18 million for a year or two, so that they didn't have to, fundamentally compromise their mission? I don't understand. I mean, I've searched for an answer to the question that you're asking, and I think it's greed.
Such a great point, Evan. I mean, the numbers are so staggering. And I know that what, the Paul Weiss has said was, well, we have to stay in business. We're making an existential decision, basically. We have to stay in business, and we wouldn't be staying in business. But I see, reject that explanation.
Yeah, I guess the viewers can't see that I made a sour face, but yeah, I mean, look, I think that's an interesting question if it's really existential, right? And I think the colleges face the same thing. And maybe this is why I will never be a university president or the managing partner of a major corporate law firm. But if you said to me, capitulate to our demands, you must now embrace the, viewpoints that we tell you to embrace. Our conception of what anti-Semitism is, our conception of viewpoint diversity in hiring, or you will cease to exist. Is it really so important that Harvard continue to exist? Right? If Harvard stands for nothing, who cares? And if Paul Weiss doesn't stand for the rule of law, then you know what? The world will exist. There'll be another successor law firm, with greedy partners who can take up that cause. And I don't understand. I mean, I do this with my students. I'm sure every human being does this at some level. What is the fundamental core value that you'll die for? Right? And I do this with my students, and for me, it's the First Amendment. I mean, I'm not a religious person, but I would die to defend your right to believe in the God that you choose to believe in, and I would die for your right to express your viewpoint, even if I vehemently disagree with it. To me, that is the core of the American project, and that's what's under threat. It's very, very deep stuff.
Evan, I am often called a number of names when criticizing the Trump administration, generally libtard type of names, but at the core of these attacks, how far are they actually from traditional conservatism, from conservative values?
Well, I mean, first of all, I've sat where you sat, right? And I appreciate that what you were collectively trying to doing is actually just look at the facts and separate what's kind of right from wrong. And you're not approaching this ideologically. And I've been called the same names that you have been called, Dave. And it's so frustrating because people just respond to the instantaneous thing, what you're saying. It doesn't matter what your career is, whether you have a career of open-mindedness or honesty to truth or commitment to the truth. These attacks are categorically, fundamentally different than anything that we've ever seen in American history. It has been my good fortune. I'm a legal historian. My big death penalty book is about these two Supreme Court cases that were litigated by the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. I got to know, and in many cases be friends with, the most important civil rights lawyers of the 20th century. And I say to them, is this like what you lived through? Is this like Nixon? And they're like, not even close, not even in the same dimension. Because Watergate actually was an affirmation of the rule of law.
Yes, I mean, such a good point. And it took some members of the president's own party to say, have you no shame? Like, what are we doing now? I mean, I know that I'm mixing metaphors there, but I guess my point is that I'm not seeing any pushback at the moment from most Republicans. Back to Harvard for 1 second, because I learned something today that I didn't know. I was one of the people who thought, well, I guess they can just dip into their endowment. They have a huge endowment. This would be the time, a rainy day fund, to use their huge endowment. And I didn't understand how much of that is restricted and, earmarked for certain things that you can't just dip in and out for research and, all that stuff. Do you want to just explain that?
You get different answers on this. I mean, my most recent book, I actually talk about this a fair amount. And Larry Summers just had an op-ed in the Times in which he says that, the degree of encumbrance is actually overstated by the colleges. I mean, they have, I think what we can agree upon is they don't have complete freedom, and they have more freedom than they care to admit. Now, I think what I just want to say is the numbers that the Trump administration has thrown around, it's not like Harvard's going to have to write a check tomorrow for $6 billion. What the administration is doing is jeopardizing future streams of income, most of which are funding for research. And really the most direct response from the universities would be to fire people because they're going to cut off research projects that they would have going on. Nothing has done anything to the operation of the college.
Okay.
And that's what Governor Healy expanded on, that she expects firings in all directions coming in the weeks ahead. Evan, we like to ask all our guests for kind of their dose of sanity in amidst all this madness. What do you each day that kind of gets you through it and keeps you level-headed? Do you have a routine that you can lend to us?
Oh, I appreciate that question. I'm sorry. What's your answers? What do you do?
Well, look, I often meditate. I exercise every day. Occasionally, I like a little tequila as well on the side. But, usually it's exercise, meditation, and time with my family. Allison, what about you?
I journal. I have a gratitude journal that I find to be very good at framing my day at the beginning of the day. If you start with gratitude, I think it helps you see the world differently. It's crappy weather here in the Northeast. Dave wouldn't know, but I like, going out for walks and being in nature when I can. And then my kids, I get a lot of joy from my kids.
Well, my answers are similar. I'm a writer, so I write every day. And I'm a father. So I would say, we have one daughter left at home. She's 15. After we're done, I'm going to go watch her play softball, and that brings me more joy than anything. And Dave, like you, I'm an exerciser. I'm a runner. Oh my God, I think I calculated I run about 75,000 miles. So that's very meditative for me. But I'm 57 years old, and I'm deeply, deeply saddened by my belief that we're going to leave a worse planet and a worse nation to our children than we were, than it was bequeathed to us. And I don't know. Our home is pretty close to carbon neutral. I've spent my life teaching at a public college. I don't make very much money, but I actually can't believe that humans have failed as spectacularly as we have. So I try to remain sane, consistent with that. I am very grateful. I'm very grateful for a space like this. I think long conversations across difference are kind of all there is to hold humans together. I think conversations on social media have been extraordinarily destructive. So I hope you'll keep doing what you're doing. And, the more kind of civil disagreement there is, the better.
Thank you.
Yeah. I wish we were all able to engage a little bit more. I mean, Allison and I every day try to reach out to Trump voters and through Republicans in Congress, and it's been difficult. We've had several Democratic congresswomen, men, senators who have come on the show. It's been very difficult to book the supporters of these moves, but we will keep trying. We are glad you will keep running and fighting the good fight. Evan Mandery is an author. He is a professor, and he is a father as well, and a writer for Politico magazine. Great to have you on, sir. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate you both so much. Thanks for having me.